we're going to do a quick shred of Amendment 2 and the Q&A review. The good news, question mark, I guess, is that there wasn't a lot of change that we saw come out with Amendment 2, some clarifications for sure. But for most of our client base, I didn't see anything that would significantly disrupt our current strategies or what we've been doing or any of our preparation efforts. So we'll talk a little bit more about what we've seen in each section. And I do just want to remind everybody that is not the entirety of the Q&A. GSA is still working through a lot of answers. So if you had something that was pending or that you didn't see addressed, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to get to it at some point before August, or it's going to fall into that category of questions that they said, oh, this isn't beneficial, or this is not a frequently asked question, so we may or may not answer it. We reserve the right to have that discretion, which is really unhelpful in a program like this, but we'll see. Okay. The one thing that really did kind of surprise me about Q&A until I got to digest everything was that they have not adjusted the due date for this. So we're still looking at having all of these proposals due by the 13th of September. If you're looking at your calendar and what today is, that's less than 30 days. And if you look at all our little circles that we have on this calendar, there's a holiday between now and then with Labor Day. So that's a long weekend. So what I would recommend that you do is get with your Trident rep, and the week of the 28th, that last week in August, and the first week in September, we really ought to be doing our final QCs and final upload checks so that the week of the 13th, if this deadline holds, we can submit things no later than the 11th or 12th. We can always pull it back if we need to, but we can get everything uploaded and ready to go and QC'd. Because as we've discussed, there's the prepare all of your evidence, get it all marked up, make sure it's going to add up to the points that you need, and then make sure everything's annotated in the system correctly so that you actually get the credits attributed to you that you need to make the qualifying score. So, yep, no changes here. We'll see what happens henceforth. In volume 1, the way that I've grouped these Q&A and the amendment changes is kind of by section, right? So there's obviously a lot of overlap between the relevant experience and the federal prime experience. And there were a lot of duplicate questions. If you went through that, 33 pages of Q&A, lots of repeat things, especially around CPARs and how they're going to calculate that. There were some sort of, I'll call them tangential questions that related more to, after award, what do we need to do? And what are some things? My favorite question was question number 1, right? Like, is this a draft or a final? God bless whoever submitted that, because they're going to need all the help they can get between now and submission. But they set the standard of that question and then kind of went down from there. But anyway, so major changes that we did see. There's some clarification around the reps and certs. So the big takeaway is that there's 3 formats in which you're providing the reps and certs for your company and all of your teammates. So under the business factors module within my company or within the teammates, it's a tab. If you've added a teammate, they'll have their own tab for this. You need to download the reps and certs from your PDF record in sam.gov. You need to complete Section K of the RFP, and we're gonna extract that for you so that you don't have to upload all 200 pages of the RFP. I don't know why GSA couldn't do that for us, but that's okay. We'll extract that section. You'll need to complete it and upload it. And then you also have to fill out your representation and certifications and company size within Symphony. So there's 3 formats for these reps and certs to make sure that companies are representing and bidding on the right tracks, the right solicitations. So nothing too earth-shattering there, just a little bit of clarification. In volumes 2 and 3, around the qualifying project experience and federal prime experience, they did make an adjustment to the FTE equivalent and what that, or I guess FTE equivalent is a little redundant, but what an FTE is in terms of the number of hours. So previously they had this at 1920. They said, oh, wait, that doesn't take into account Juneteenth. So they've reduced it down to 1,912 hours. So if you've got a project where you have the labor hours actually broken out and you are using that in the aggregate to substantiate credits for scale, right, with number of FTEs based on the domain you're submitting in, instead of dividing by 1920, now you're going to divide by 1912. Probably not going to make a huge difference, but if you had one of those numbers that was right on the edge of qualifying, it might actually help you a little bit. What's really interesting is that they did clarify that you cannot annualize FTE hours on projects that are less than 12 months. And this applies for whether the project is completed or if it's ongoing, and it's going to be less than 12 months total. So why this matters is if you had a 6-month project and you had people who would have been full-time had it been the full year, then you had 10 FTEs or full-time equivalents for that 6-month period. Unless the hours were there to substantiate it, you're not going to be able to say they were working in a full-time capacity for the duration of this project. GSA is not allowing us to do this. So you really have to just keep it very simple. Add up the number of labor hours that you actually had on the contract, divide it by the 1912, and that'll give you what your FTE count was. Okay, this was foot stomped in a number of places, but I highlighted answer number 153. The offer can rely on the JP3 to demonstrate and verify that a QP meets or exceeds a minimum average annual value of relevant work. The JP3 is good enough. And this was reiterated over and over again. So if you're in that situation where your contract document doesn't expressly or explicitly, one of the two words that wants to come out of my mouth, prove what you're trying to claim, the JP3 is your magic fix-it button. This is a really important note to make, that there's no automatic relevance for subcontract work. So if you were saying, hey, we subcontracted to the prime and the prime's contract was under this NICS code, there's no transitive property there. There's two reasons for this. Number one, a prime is supposed to issue you a NICS code on your subcontract when they engage you to do work. As part of the FAR, they're supposed to designate what services you will be providing and what services those NICS code align to. Number two is we're only getting credit for subcontractor work for the work that we actually performed. And that could be different than what the prime was engaged by the federal government to do. So this isn't super surprising, but it was good to see that clarification because it shuts down the what if category. There were a couple clarifications around the collections of task orders and what is required for documentation there. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about that in past performance because that's where the majority of the clarifying guidance was. There are still questions about the actual upload in Symphony, and I did dial into that 90, actually it was like 100-minute presentation this morning around those uploads, and they did not address the question there. There's still a few other clarifying questions that we have out to Apex around how to annotate things or how to attribute the credits within Symphony. But more to follow on this one, hopefully. So again, doesn't change anybody's strategy necessarily, but there are some clarifications around this. This next bullet I found a little bit helpful. The first tier subcontracting or teaming partner verification must directly correspond to the contractor task order number of the QP. That was always in there, but then they added or have a clear record of connection. So if you've got one of these instances where the subcontract doesn't happen to list your prime contract number, but you know that everything lined up, you could use the project name, you could use the periods of performance, you could have some other connection, and you would highlight that in your teaming document to make sure that it hits all of those qualifying criteria for the piece of evidence that that you're submitting. And then just again, some foot stomping clarification that if you have all your supporting validation documentation for a given reference, and you can highlight LCATs, and it's very clear that there's more than 5, and it expressly calls out that you need 10 cleared personnel, whatever you're claiming credits for, if it's in your documentation, you don't have to get a JP3 signed by the customer. This is especially true if you have an automatically relevant project. And so as long as you so if you have the automatically relevant project, right, or it's annotated on there what you're trying to do, you don't need to get that JP3 signed. As soon as you need a narrative, or as soon as you're splitting things across different domains or trying to get your minimum average value established, the JP3 comes into play. Okay, and I'm trying to keep an eye here on the chat box. So if there's questions or if we need to slow down and talk about anything, I'm happy to do that. Systems rates, clearances, and certifications. There was a lot of duplicate questions about this. The bottom line is that nail in the coffin, right? Although I thought it was already in there a few times. They're not accepting third-party audits. Didn't think that was a tongue twister, but it turns out it is. So if you've got a third-party audit of your accounting system, sorry, that's not going to fly. One thing I didn't put on the slide here because it's kind of an admin thing for the ISO. The information security ISO cert, they are accepting the 2013 version as well as the 2022 version because there was an update. So either one of those is permissible. Otherwise, not a lot of changes to this section. Past performance. There's some interesting language in here. Again, some clarification around the collections of task orders. So they offered a few thoughts around this. One is that if you don't have IDIQ level CPARs, or if each task order doesn't have a CPARs, you can aggregate those into one JP6. You just have to list all of the task orders on that JP6 that you're getting coverage of every single one that you've claimed. And then if you don't have a record of past performance, it's not going to factor into the evaluation rating for past performance submissions. And then if you could submit each task order, or sorry, a JP6 for each task order, if you don't want to aggregate them. So everything's got to be on one, or you have to have distinct forms for everything else there. For CPARs that are older than 3 years, because that's kind of the archive period. Excuse me. Kind of a funny answer here. So according to GSA, they said the CPARs help desk can be contacted to unarchive older CPARs if you give them the contract number and you send it there. Now, what's interesting is the entity that submitted this question said that they had tried this and got shut down. So I don't know. I haven't tried to do this. I don't know if you have to be the government requesting or if you can do it as the contractor. You ought to be able to do it as the contractor. So if you're in the situation and you're trying to get CPARs for a contract that's older than 3 years, let me know and we can come up with a strategy here. But if they're not able to, GSA left the door open, right? They said, well, if they're not able to pull it for you and nobody can get this report, then you can use that JP6. So they gave you some specific language in here where you have to provide a copy of the email from the help desk and say that they're unable to unarchive at the request, provide the copy so that they can see that you attempted to get the CPARs that exists, but you were unable to, and so then they'll accept your JP6. Okay, and then if the CPARs report at the IDIQ level covers an individual task order that you're trying to get some sort of past performance verification for, if it's called out in the CPARs, right? If your government agency only did CPARs at the IDIQ level, but they call your task order out, then you're permitted to use that IDIQ CPARs. Otherwise, it needs to be task order specific. And this is really important. It sounds like an admin point, but as you're reviewing your documents, you might be surprised to see what your files do or don't say. Make sure that your CPARs are marked final and not incomplete. You can't have something that is unsigned, unfinished, or otherwise unfinalized. Okay, cost and price. We are still pending the functionality of Symphony. If you were on the demo that they did this morning, in their demo model, you could see the cost and price functions. Those are not open yet to industry. So we think those are going to be coming out in the next couple days. It should be pretty straightforward. But we also know that there's another amendment forthcoming with this. So they did add a couple clarifications, though, with that only the direct labor rates from column C and the proposed indirect rates will be evaluated for fair and reasonable price. They're not looking at your fully burdened ceiling rate. So anything that, where it extrapolates out and adds the escalation for the next 16 years, all of those numbers don't have to be within the ceiling rate. Those can be higher, right? They built that escalation in for us, and they confirmed that, yes, we intentionally added that escalation to year one. So the other thing that I thought was helpful was that they clarified in a couple different places that if you have contractor site and government site, they just want to see the highest set. So if it's higher to work on government site, list those higher rates. So you don't have to provide two different location rates, basically. And then if the offer does not have current approved rates, you submit the rates generated from the offer's accounting system. And basically industry said, well, hey, small businesses don't generate indirect rates. Can we submit a narrative of the rate calculations based on our pools? And GSA said, yeah, as long as it includes all of those other things that we asked for. So just gives you another avenue to provide information. And then in terms of the responsibility volume, this is something that's come up in other conversations, right? Because there's a lot of sensitivity, understandably so, about providing a company's fiscal data, especially for the last 3 years. So GSA and Apex are just sort of giving the assurance that post-award, the financial statements that are submitted are going to be stored in this electronic contract management system. Only people on the government side with the need to know will be able to access those. And really, these are just being submitted to determine whether or not you've got the financial resources to manage this contract or execute on this contract. The other clarification that we got was in terms of the period, right? Because they said we need the previous 3 years of financial reports. If your company's calendar year runs January to December, what they're looking for is complete years. So 2020, 2021, and 2022. You don't have to provide an interim statement from 2023 because that year is not yet complete. Now, if this drags forward and we end up submitting in 2024, that's a different story, but we don't seem to be on that trajectory. So for all intents and purposes right now, our best advice is to go pull the financial records for 2020, 2021, and 2022, as those will be the most recent 3 complete years if you're on this January to December schedule, which most companies operate by. Any questions? That was a really quick shred of kind of the big changes in that Q&A and the amendment. Don't see anybody typing. This might be a really quick webinar. Scheduled it for an hour, but if we don't need an hour, I won't hold anybody hostage here. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. I can hang on for a few minutes. Oh, here we go. Okay. Big takeaways from the Symphony overview. It was not very helpful. That's probably not the synopsis you're looking for. Now, I say that with the caveat of I've been in Symphony a lot and have been coaching a lot of you in Symphony, and I've used this for other submissions. So they were actually silent on a number of topics. I asked a couple of questions, and they're like, "Hey, why are there 2 different categories for subcontracting, right? Like, why do you care for a subcontract to small or other than small business? Like, why do some of these things exist? And what are what about all these extra fields, right?" And they just didn't respond about a lot of those things. So they GSA and Apex have indicated that we might see some changes to the user interface, right? There might be some fields that go away or some things that get clarified. But besides that, they spend a lot of time on like how to register people and how to approve registrations. And when you're doing your uploads, I didn't think their tagging examples were particularly helpful. In fact, they were a little bit confusing because they said, don't use page numbers, but then in their tags, they had page numbers. So if you want a crash course in document uploads and proposal submissions, it's probably more efficient to spend 20 minutes on the phone with a screen share, and we can walk you through it. The pricing template, they did change. I think they released, so the short answer is yes. The direct labor rate ceiling is now an Excel sheet, right? It was PDF before. I don't know that the numbers changed. A couple of them might have gone up a couple dollars, but that's still not the final version. So not super helpful there. Like I said, most of the questions around the Q&A were just confirmation as it relates to price and cost, that they want the higher rates and that they did want to apply the escalation in the first year. Haven't heard anything about a possible extension. And in fact, we've heard the opposite from GSA, right? From Tiffany Hickson, that she says, no, they don't want to extend this and they want to keep it on track as much as possible. So it's, we'll see where this goes. If you have not gotten hot and heavy on OASIS Plus, I would say this is the month to do it. Because worst case, the deadline holds. Well, worst case or best case, depending on what the rest of your year looks like. We could get this over with, get everything uploaded, and then be done with it. But yeah, not planning for a significant extension at this point. There's a lot in the Q&A around JVs, right? And I didn't cover that here because we don't have anybody that's in that bidding situation. Thank goodness. But if you do have any questions about that, we can do a one-off session. So yeah, that's nothing incredibly earth-shattering from this morning's call. Anything else that you guys want to ask about or talk about? Okay. Not seeing anything else. All right, so I know we have individual tag ups with some of you guys scheduled for the rest of this week, and like I said, I'll rewind to this calendar, right? Not to stress anyone out or artificially, um, you know, artificially add to your stress level. But today's the 16th, not the 15th, like on my calendar. If we've not checked any of your supporting volumes, please get us those documents soonest. So that's your professional employee compensation plan, your uncompensated overtime policy. If you're going in the unrestricted track and we haven't seen your small business subcontracting plan yet, please send that our way. We are catching things. They're small, but they might require that you get some document approved and reviewed internally before you can release it and have it incorporated as part of your master IDIQ. So we just want to make sure that we're not doing all that stuff at the last minute and jamming things up unnecessarily. If you have not started any of your uploads, once you have all of your documentation for a project, that's when it's the easiest time to do it. It's really difficult to add things piecemeal and try to aggregate them in your proposal. But once you have your past performance document, your JP3 if you're using it, your FPDS record, your contract award form, your statement of work or PWS, if you've got all of those things, you can start the upload. Oh, that does remind me. We are updating our file upload and tracker it got bigger because we've included all the additional fields, but hopefully it'll be a little bit more helpful and include some of the things like the integrated experience and the management and staffing credits, because Phil was right, those were not on there previously. So we added those, and I'm just waiting to see what the pricing module in Symphony looks like. I've got an idea of what it's going to look like, and I know what we need to upload, but I just want to have a little bit of confirmation before I redistribute that. So we will get all these documents posted to our information hub. If we get another Q&A that starts to really shake things up, then we will have a webinar next week. Otherwise, it'll be the following week. But again, we'll start thinking through, assuming this timeline holds, right? That last week in August and the first week of September, when can you block 3 hours for you and your Trident rep to sit and look at all your documentation that's been uploaded to Symphony and go through that QC to make sure things are tagged correctly, that you've got the files in the right places, that your points are aggregating in the way that you think they're going to, so that there's no surprises for submission. So, okay, great. Well, thanks very much for your time, everybody.